All right, so we are going to talk about how AI is going to transform game development. We've hinted at this throughout the day, but this great session is going to take us home on this topic. So I hand it over to the fabulous Emily.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Another session about AI, but this one is going to be extremely fun because we have some amazing panelists on my right. My name is Emily Joly. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Zoe Immersive. We are essentially a no-code platform for content creators, and we're also exploring how we can train large language models to build actual final games and experiences. AI in games is nothing new, as you all know, but the recent progress in generative AI is going to change the way we build those games. And I'm beyond excited to hear from the three panelists on my right who are building the next generation of AI platforms. So if we could kickstart this with a 1-minute intro, tell us a bit about your company, what you're doing, and why are you so excited about AI in games? Veronica, start with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone that is here. I'm delighted to be at AWE this year and with my fellow panelists. Didimo, I'm the founder of Didimo. In my previous life, I was a researcher and a professor at the university as well. I've been working on character technology for more than I remember, probably 15, 18 years. And the whole idea of creating Didimo is to build the next generation of interaction models. I strongly believe we will all have our identity in the virtual world in some shape or form. So I decided we should focus on how do we create our virtual identity, in this case, in particular for gaming and entertainment and immersive experiences. So we can populate virtual worlds with a click of a button, pretty much, and we'll deep dive on how we do that later, probably.
Awesome. Yeah, very excited to be here too. Kylan Gibbs from Inworld AI. We're a developer platform for AI characters and immersive experiences, so really powering the characters behind a lot of the games that are, hopefully going to be coming out over the next little while. Providing them with deep personalities, connecting them to narratives, allowing them to actually adapt to the players in real time, and connecting those to the incredible worlds that people are actually building in these games. And we really think that sort of this next stage of immersiveness will be driven through the co-creation of really, I guess, players with the characters that they interact with and how that influences this sort of dynamic creation of the worlds and experiences. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, and hi everyone, glad to be here. Emmanuel de Maistre, people call me M. I am the founder and CEO of Scenario.com, which is a platform for game artists and game studio to train their own AI models using their own art, so they can make very consistent visuals, mostly 2D visuals so far, using their own training data sets. And it's something that we started 6 months ago, fairly recent, right?
So fresh.
Well, yeah, but in AI, it's like, I don't know.
I know,
6
yeah,
years,
you're right. No, it's been 100 years in AI.
I aged 6 years for sure. And very, very happy to add like 50,000 users that love training their own models to go beyond Midjourney, beyond Stable Diffusion, and these very horizontal, unique models.
Awesome. So, all of you represent different types of, companies and platforms. AI can be highly effective as a development tool. It's also a great way to just enhance the player experience in-game. So how are we going to use generative AI in the future to build games? And, how do you see it impact the industry? And where's kind of the innovation happening? Maybe Kylan, you can start off on that one.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's really two dynamics or two paradigms. One is design time and one is runtime changes. I think at design time, both Didimo and Scenario are really touching on this, is actually how we create tools that enhance the experience of the creator and actually how they can create the better experience. For example, allowing you to do automatic texturing is a very basic version, and enabling you to create better animations, allowing you to create the visuals or the avatars or the characters within the experience, and making that a powerful way to actually improve the productivity of the creators, the designers. I think at the runtime side as well, of course, at Inworld, we're powering the actual dynamic dialogue of the characters, the narrative that evolves out of that, and changing the way that players interact with it. I think that something that's interesting happening there is it sort of blends all as well, kind of the the line between design time and runtime. It used to be that, as a game designer, you'd produce a game and then someone consumes that game exactly as you kind of produced it. But now with the power of AI, maybe you'll actually generate different objects at runtime. You'll generate different textures for the character. In our case, generating different personalities, different dialogue for the character. And so the player is actually partially a creator in that moment as well. And I feel like that's kind of the primary change here is the designer or the creator's role is not just kind of perfecting everything and making it a static object, but creating a part of a system that then allows a user to come in and partially then co-create the final end product, and every single user will have a completely different experience as a result.
Emmanuel, Veronica, do you want to jump on that one too?
Yeah, so absolutely. So in terms of the AR, and following up on what Carl was saying, what we're really focusing, and I think people is important to understand, is in our case at least, is we really consider the artists at the center of the action and the technical directors. So there's one piece that even though AI facilitates and speed up the creation process, the creative component that goes into a game, it's many times defined by the art director. So what we really care is about, okay, can we empower the artist to create, for example, all the assets that are going to be around the digital characters, and they just create it once, really well, really detailed, and then that can be automatically transfer and adapted to any other character that is created. And that's where, in the runtime phase, as Kyle was saying, it becomes really powerful, because that's where AI will empower the users, is you can create, in this case, diversity of digital humans that before was impossible. If we think, for instance, like GTA, right? You get into GTA and you have X amount of characters, but it's limited the amount of diversity that you get in. So how can we create now worlds that are more appealing, that are more representative of every ethnicity, or even creatures that we haven't even thought about? So we could create like new races, right? Like an elf type of a race, or orcs or orgs. So we are extending the gameplay, we're extending the worlds that games can actually afford doing, because before it would be really costly to generate that amount of content. And with the power of AI, in our case, we can overcome that limitation of time, costs, and artistic skills that are needed in order to populate these virtual worlds really, really fast. And then the second step is, so you have the creation process, and then is in-game, right? When you're at runtime and you're playing the game, how can we open these immersive experiences to users that can generate their own content? And that will become magical. This is kind of like what I think the future will look like, right? So the users and the gamers will be able to create their content that they can go into the game. And that content needs to be adapted to the quality and the style of the game that is going to be immersed. So again, we will need to have powerful tools that would allow for that adaptation. So every asset will match the style of that game that already exists, unless you're playing Roblox and those type of games that you don't need to have the same style.
So I will not challenge much of what I've said. I completely agree. I can give you a few examples, though. First, about the role of the artist, or the game artist, or the art director. That's interesting. There's been a lot of controversy about AI, putting artists out of a job. The thing is, at least for us, and probably for you guys, artists are the biggest champion and the buyers of what we do. And once they understand, they can really control, they can have their own creations, they can guide how AI is being worked. They love it. And they finally understand, they will co-create with the players, users, community. So that can happen, as you said, at design time. That can happen at runtime. And there is an in-between. The in-between is when the game finds a way to interact with the community to find new concepts, new assets, new characters that will be kind of voted or shared, and then they will end up in the game in the end. And that I find that pretty interesting. It's a way to engage the community before going straight into the game, which is tricky in terms of architecture, cost, creation, generation time, and so on.
Yeah, you're touching an interesting point, I think, on the designer side of things and the skills. I'm sure there's, I know there's a bunch of people in the audience that are trying to, get started with AI and thinking about what as an artist and a designer, what is going to be their role in this. So I'm interested to hear a little bit deeper around on all three of you. How do you help these creators or these developers? What are your tools providing, and how do you enhance that process? And also, do you see any difference in just skills when they're making choices, when they're starting in this industry and thinking about, all right, I want to be in video games. What's that going to look like, in 5 years or next week?
What I would say is these artists become, first of all, artists among all the categories we've spoken with are the best positioned to use these tools because they have the language, they have the understanding that developers might not have. Second, artists might become trainers. They might become trainers, not like in training models themselves, but they really guide and they find all the levers and the tools to control, tame that AI beast. And then that's the new skill set to learn. And it is not being learned in 1 hour. It is not like dropping a prompt in Midjourney. It takes a while to look at fine tuning, to look at prompt embeddings, to look at control net in case of imagery, and so on. And that probably takes a few weeks to maybe more. Like who knows? It's coming so fast. That's the new skill set to learn, training.
Yeah, I think there's something as well where when people first look at AI as a consumer or as a non-artist or non-creative, you go in there and you go to Midjourney or you go to ChatGPT and you can create something pretty good pretty quickly. And it kind of the time invested required to get to like an acceptable bar goes down. But then the reality is the time to get to the top degree bar is still very high and is really still only capable by those top end creatives. And so what we see is that people get scared at first when they see, oh, everybody can create a decent photo with Midjourney, or they come into Inworld and they can create a character. But really, those great creatives who have amazing tastes are the ones who create the best outcomes. And it's not like that bar stays the same. That's, I think, what's happening is the bar is actually increasing. And through all these tools, the quality of the experiences, the immersiveness, the actual end state is actually changing. And so when every time you add on a new tool, whether that's a paintbrush or game engines, and you keep adding on these new tools, it just extends the capacity of these creatives to actually build new worlds. And I think that's what's really exciting is, we're not just taking a kind of an existing set of possible experiences and making those faster to create. We're actually adding on a whole new category of experiences that are possible to create with these new tools. And what we see is that the most incredible creatives are actually taking advantage of that to produce that. So for example, we recently did a project with Neil Stevenson, and a lot of creatives and writers are quite concerned, I think, of how these things will change their industry. And Neil was really looking at these tools and saying, okay, actually, I could just take a character and embed in it the knowledge of, a snow crash in that sort of universe and tell the story through that, and how he extended sort of, the traditional version of storytelling using these technologies. And I think a lot of creatives are coming onto that as well and thinking about how this becomes a new sort of modality, a new paintbrush, rather than as a replacement of their existing tools.
Yeah, I completely agree with what has been said. And what we've noticed with the tool we've been developing is the fact that the artists are also leveraging the new technology to improve their workflow. So I'll give a concrete example. So for example, we can create the digital characters and put all the garments and assets on top of it. That usually in a pipeline will go into an asset manager, and then someone else will need to review the work that has been done. So what we've noticed is by developing these technologies that can give really fast feedback, the artist itself, they can see the actual final work that will be in-game already in the tools. So they can speed up the iteration of even bug fixing of their own artwork. So that's really important. And then the other one is the one I mentioned before, which is you let the artist first guide the process. So they are the owners on the specifications, number of triangles, texture maps that they want to use, the level of the rig that they want to have on the character. So they own it, they have it, they define it. And then once you can put it on an automatic system and all the characters can come out at the end, they can just really keep on focusing on what they're best at and speed the creation so they can focus on gameplay and build other games faster. So.
This is still all amazing, and I do have one question for the three of you about kind of the challenges and limitations. Is it, from the outside, it sounds pretty magical. Like, we could sort of build anything, and just curious to hear your thought. like today, are there any limitations that you know of, things that you can't really do, and things you're expecting to be able to do, you know, in the next year or so, if any? Maybe there aren't any limitations. I don't know. I want to hear it from you.
I can start because I see challenges and limitations all day everywhere. So yeah, it's very difficult. So the one that I see really complex, if we focus again more on gaming, is we can automate the creation of characters. That we've done it, check, right? We can get 94 to 98% accuracy on digital human characters if you input a selfie of yourself, check. We have done that, spent many years solving that technology. Now the next challenge is how we can put this at runtime. Because when you put this at runtime in an in-game editor, each game will have their own user experience. So the big question that I yet do not have the answer, and I leave open for everyone here, is to think about how can we standardize, you know, the creation of an in-game editor that then we can build like an SDK and then underneath an API, so other games can leverage this in-game editor, even when they go from title to title. I see that software architecture still a big, complex problem to solve.
Yeah, I think in our case, there's two kind of primary buckets of challenges. One is, I think, like fundamental AI or technical challenges, and the other is, I would say, a quality question. So on the technical challenges, there's of course, you know, when we're talking about generating dialogue, we're generating narratives, there's of course things like safety, so, you know, making sure that the audience is appropriate and the content that's produced for that audience is appropriate. Then there's questions of fourth wall. So, you know, for example, you know, we worked on a Star Wars project, and, you know, if you ask a Star Wars character who the president is and it says Joe Biden, it's going to completely break that experience. And so, you know, you need to make sure that you're kind of staying within that universe, and so making sure you constrain that. Then you have to make sure, you know, that the characters are staying within context, and they're not, you know, all of a sudden saying, I'm an AI model, you know, nice to meet you. Like, it needs to stay within the specific context, the world, the moment that it's in, and so contextualizing all of that. And those are all very hard technical challenges, because naturally, these generative models, if you talk to ChatGPT, for example, it will go in any direction that you want to take it. So how you sort of bind it to that moment and to that audience and to that universe is a big challenge. On the quality side, I think the question is, for every experience, what good looks like is very different. You know, in a specific type of game, you know, you may want something very entertaining, something very fanciful, and another one you want very serious and on the moment. And ultimately, that's up to the taste of the creator to actually define that. And so, for example, what we do is we allow creators to go in and actually give feedback on the interactions and kind of give more specified feedback that allows them to sort of refine that experience. And I think this is something that's really important to the future, is that for every single game and experience, good, in our case, let's say goodness of dialogue or narrative, is going to be different, and how we add on those controls so that the creator basically can add their own preferences to define what that sort of quality looks like is important. Because the problem with sort of, you know, very horizontal large language models or AI in general is it kind of assumes good in like a technical standard that the AI was trained in, which may not align with exactly what you want for that moment. And so I think it's up to us as the builders of tools to add on those controls and those feedback loops that allow the creators to sort of slowly narrow down to the version of quality that they want, and then even further to what the player wants. So, you know, who is that player and what does good look like for them in that moment? And so I think those technical challenges, those quality challenges are kind of ongoing and will constantly evolve.
And I'm more on the visual side of things and like visual assets. And what I see the main challenge is right now is 3D. That's like, it's being brought in like 80% of the discussions we have with studios. They're like, when 3D, sir? Whether it's text to 3D or 2D to 3D. Everybody's interested, but nobody has found yet, to be frank, a solution that is satisfying so far. Even like the big companies like NVIDIA, they have some sort of models coming out, but it's not to a point where it can be in too many games. It will likely start with like simple graphic styles, like low poly, voxels, you know, things like this. But before 3D is like can be AI generated, we still have we still have some time. 2D though. Maybe like text is widely accepted as being good enough in most cases. Yes, some challenges remain, like generation time should be like subsequent, ideally if it has to be like in-game at runtime, but we're getting there. So 3D is next, and I look forward to 3D by the end of the year, or before.
A little bit before, maybe? No?
I hope so, yeah.
Counting on you.
No, not me.
No.
Hopefully, maybe.
Never know. But yes, you're touching on a good point here, like 3D assets, what the quality of the games that we're going to be able to create with all those tools is going to be interesting because it's such a combination of different technologies.
But there are ways to approach 3D with the existing 2D generations, such as spheres, 360, skyboxes, texturing of meshes, panoramas, and so on. This is basically like putting 2D images on a 3D sphere or a 3D model. So that would be the first step, and it's already there anyway.
Yeah, what are some example of assets that are, that can be generated with your platform, for example?
I mean, we've right now mostly focused on 2D images,
yeah.
As long as they're highly style consistent. And so instead of describing a style with words, with tokens, such as, I don't know, hyper-realistic, detailed, intricate, blah, 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 blah. No user will have the idea for these tokens. We let the artist train the style in the model. And so when the prompter starts interacting with the model, they don't have to put all these terms into play. And then we do textures, and we're going to start 360 skyboxes, and yeah, 3D will come next.
Awesome. That sounds exciting. So you touched a little bit on that at the beginning, but it's a question that is a bit different than the generation or the creation of content. It's more on the playing side of things. And how can we use generative AI to create games that will appeal to a wider range of players and to create more like diverse and personalized gameplay experiences? Because I think that that's one of the key aspects in AI is that you're going to be able to generate a bunch of things, but how do we make sure that all those games and those experiences can cater to who I am as a person and a more diverse group? In my company, we have that creation tool. It's been a nightmare to try and have characters that are diverse enough into the library that correspond to whatever the users are doing. So I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can start. So specifically when you're thinking about like interactions with characters, in all media or content to date, it's really been the fact that whatever the content has provided, whatever movie you're watching, whatever book you're reading, you're interacting with the characters regardless of who you are. We recently introduced sort of a new feature in Inworld where you can take into account the player profile. So who is that player demographically, in terms of the real world profile, their age, their demographic, that may bias the model towards different types of interactions. And then even further, who are they in that world? If you're a level 1 rogue versus a level 100 mage, what mission you're on, what world you're from, all of those things can sort of tailor it. And I think that's really important because as people, when we interact with anybody in this room, they'll tailor that conversation to exactly who we are. And we're quite used to that in sort of a human experience. But when we interact with media, it is very kind of depersonalized, and we interact with it regardless of who we are. And I think that there's something there that the next version of media overall, and specifically in gaming, it will adapt to who we are. And every single person coming into that game experience will experience something different. So in our case, that means that the dialogue will change, how they interact with you, what they say to you, maybe how they, maybe they'll be kinder to you if you're, a younger audience, and they'll, you're earlier on in the game, and they'll be very hard on you if you're an advanced user. And then also thinking about sort of how that changes in the world. So for example, I always think about this, I remember I played the old Fable games, and I'd go through and you destroy a village and you massacre everyone, and you go to the next village and they're like happy to see you, and they take you into the shop, and they're like, I just stole everything from the last shop. Like surely they would have put out a notice. And so you imagine how that changes, not just adapting to me as a person, but also to my behavior in the game. And I think that up levels the immersiveness of those experiences, and also feels like there's consequences. And I think that also just changes the way that we even think about games as something that actually reflects our own behavior. And I think that's why I love those old Fable games, or these games where depending on your actions, the world actually adapts to you. And I think that the possibility of that is really kind of extended here.
I can add and complement what Kyle said, which is more in the immersion. How can we, by creating a more diverse world, we can feel more immersed and more represented by that world, and also going into the how can you adapt to the personality or the identity of the user. We could even start creating worlds that you feel more integrated into it, or maybe you can choose and you want a completely different world because you've never experienced that in terms of the characters that are going to be immersed. And it's not like you're walking into a game and seeing all the characters looking alike. So now you can actually say, well, I want a game that has the New York population type of style. And then suddenly AI will automatically generate you a complete world populated with a similar diversity that you can find in New York, for instance. So I think that that is the key power that AI is going to be bringing, something that if you only rely by manual work would be impossible to achieve. So it's about bringing immersion, bringing the adaptation of the world to what the user would like to see. And lastly, when you're actually playing a game, one of the things you spend a lot of time on it is actually defining that avatar that is going to represent you. So wouldn't it be cool that instead of actually having a finite number of parameters that you can fine-tune, you can input it with your own elements that identifies you as a person, right? And then put the brain behind it.
I think this might be an interesting segue into the user-generated content question that I'm interested in talking about when it comes to generative AI. How do you think gameplay can be, affected or directed by players when there's some kind of UGC element into the game? Have you thought about that, and are you already, kind of thinking of how that might affect the gameplay overall?
That's what I'm betting the success of Scenario on. So yeah, I'm highly interested. And of course, every game studio, because we sell to game studio, they initially consider us as a design authoring tool. But once they realized it could be brought into the hands of the users, they love it, and they see UGC coming faster to them. But making a game asset, such as a 2D or 3D asset, is not making the gameplay. So maybe you guys might be more into creating the stories and the gameplay, and thanks to user-generated input.
Yeah, I think that frankly, everything that is actually experienced through Inworld is UGC. So, the designer effectively designs the brain of the character and kind of the personality, but this is really just like designing a very advanced, personalized, context-aware version of a ChatGPT style experience, but then the user is actually the one generating the content through that experience. And I think that's the interesting thing with a lot of this AI is it is fundamentally all UGC at a certain level. And I think that what we've seen is that kind of the magic is, I can create a beloved character, but the thing is that when I interact with a scripted character, I'm still not creating that content as a user when I'm actually interacting with that. And so to be able to step into that world and feel like I'm drawing out like my specific experience based on the questions that I ask, based on how I interact with it. We have some characters, that have had thousands of different users, and every single conversation is different. And I think that there's something really interesting there where I feel like I am actually not just a consumer of that content, but actually a co-creator of it in every single experience. And I can imagine a future where, people are filming their gameplay through their 40 or 100 hours, and every single person has a completely different experience. And then some snippets of that becoming, beloved, because it's like, oh wow, look at this one character, drew out this one weird little scenario. I think these are always popular. I think that, what was it? And there's like a Skyrim mod where there's like a dragon lord on a rock, and everybody kind of goes up and does the same sorts of scenarios because they want to draw out some like unique experience. And we saw this before, over the last 10 years. There's lots of YouTube videos of like, just because of the timing of different NPC interactions, like it was like, oh, that was really interesting. But now it actually will be generated in real time. And so I think it becomes like a game becomes a platform where people can actually generate this, like the new Legend of Zelda game. People were going in and creating these crazy contraptions because they were able to design their own like interactions within it. And I think about that as sort of a hint that users are hungry to create themselves as part of these games. And so I think this kind of goes beyond just UGC to all in media actually being a co-creation experience.
Yeah, and I think one important point to take into consideration is that no matter what content is created, then the game itself will need to be able to interpret and understand what are the properties of those assets that you're uploading, and how will they behave, and how will they impact your actions within the game. And that is also, talking about challenges, that's a difficult one, because pretty much anyone will be able to create any asset, upload it through an in-game editor, attach it to a character they have defined or created, and then suddenly you have to have a really smart game mechanics behind that would be able to understand and make the game still, engaged and do not lose the thread of what the game is about. So that's a very complex topic, but that's where I hope, gaming will evolve with time.
I can just give you one example about like a game that would not be possible ever without AI today, because we work with them. It's called Million on Mars, and it's about colonizing planet Mars. Each player gets, I think, 10 acres, and they're supposed to colonize like the real satellite map of the planets. And once they get that plot, they need to create a warehouse, a rover, a mine, minerals, a greenhouse, a spaceship. I mean, there is a list of a certain number of items, and they do create these items in a guided way with their own ideas. So the mineral have the certain shape and color, same for the greenhouse, same for the spaceship, and so on. And so think about, I don't know, a million player creating 10 to 20 to 100 assets. No designer, no game artist could do that. And so apparently the players get to enjoy the game pretty much. And what comes next is, because it's a Web3 gaming company, they want the player to own these assets thanks to cryptographic tokens or NFTs that they could potentially trade. And that might be an additional layer for a new gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think there are any kind of ethical considerations when it comes to UGC and AI? Of course, you know, when you look at platforms like Roblox or Fortnite, there's I don't know, they have like 1,000 employees just doing moderation. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that side as well. Once, you know, if it's a game that's totally, you know, generated and it can adapt to whatever the users are doing. So are there any considerations there in terms of what you can build, limitations? You know, can you kind of implement that into the system's thoughts?
Yes. Absolutely. Anytime you introduce anything where a user can create something, there's only going to be a very finite amount of time before some sort of inappropriate object is crafted in that game. And I think that this is like, you know, pretty common across anything that's been created across time. And so I think it's on us as the tool creators to build in filters and controls. So, you know, we have a variety of safety controls. You know, we can create an experience that's appropriate for, you know, young Disney, you know, children. You can like also think of an experience like a GTA style experience where you do have to create that for 18+ audiences. And so we have to build in those controls to adapt to those audiences out of the box. And then I think there is a question of also how, you know, we need to make sure that we're learning over time. Like users for sure are breaking them. I don't know if people remember, but when ChatGPT came out, people figured out some ways to hack the prompts that you could get some really inappropriate content out of it. And so I think there's also a question of, you know, how you're constantly learning over time and monitoring these things. You know, there's probably some visual assets that they may create that might be quite inappropriate as well. And frankly, the thing is that especially teenage users love doing this. And so I think we need to find a way to make sure that they have the controls that they need while we're still kind of staying within the space of, you know, something that's appropriate for all audiences. And I think it's always going to be an evolving thing for the rest of humanity, just because, you know, there's that silly aspect of everyone that wants to build something ridiculous. And for sure, you know, we have people coming on and talking to characters and trying to draw something out, and it's really on us to build in those filters. So we have really in-depth safety filters. We have those as well, the fourth wall controls to make sure you're not going outside of that universe. And all of those are on us as the tool builders, but I think also on the creators that we're working with to build in sort of the appropriate levels of controls that allow the user to have a great experience while not, let's say, you know, breaking it and making it sort of inaccessible for most audiences.
Yeah, I can add on that, I think, and maybe drifting a little bit on protecting the safety of the user while we develop safety key elements within the tool, is that I think it relies on the culture of the company that you're setting up. And so, for example, we have an ethic advisor team. We work with experts on, in our case, on ethnicity to make sure that everything we create, you know, will not offend anyone. And on top of that is about cascading the concept of what is right and what is wrong and how we can protect the human rights at the end of the day from every single person within the company. So it has, for me, it has to be a cultural thing within everything we develop. So I make sure that everyone within Didimo understand what we believe is right and what we believe is wrong. And we also have the opportunity, because we're a B2B type of business, to decide who we work with and who we don't. So that also, it's an important decision that you have to make consciously. Until maybe there are other processes, legal laws that can protect the right and wrong use of technology. So.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's ethics and there is regulation, and regulation is moving pretty fast. Sometimes not in the same direction. I'm not sure if you guys in the room have seen, I think today or yesterday, Japan ruled that it was okay to basically train any model with any copyrighted images, which I found crazy. It was just this morning. I need to dig deeper about it to better understand how this is possible. But it's going to be an interesting time ahead for companies to decide what's right and wrong, and government to decide what's right and wrong. And we don't have all the answers right now, but it's definitely a topic to keep in mind.
Yes, absolutely. And can you give me or give the audience some examples of games that are existing now that are using generative AI, either through your platforms or like kind of have a concrete, a few concrete examples of what's out there that you can already play or try? Is there anything on your mind, either something that's using your platforms or something that you know of that exists out there?
Yeah. Well, just today, the Antic launched an experience which you can go try out at their booth, actually, called Wall, which is a talking owl that teaches you about the redwood forest. So that one's kind of fun, and you can just try it on your phone. We've also built a game called Origins, which is effectively kind of a vertical slice of, you can kind of think of a AAA style game where you go in as a detective and you're interacting with characters, and it's quite fun because you have a general mission, which is to kind of uncover what's happened after a laboratory exploded. But by interacting with all the characters, you're kind of drawing out that experience. And this is actually kind of a test bed that we use to kind of constantly evolve and just build the new features. But it allows you to kind of see that. And then over this summer, we'll see a few experiences coming out. And actually, some of them were quite creative. We always think about this from, let's say, narrative-oriented games where you're talking to characters and drawing out narrative. But actually, they build it with almost a real-time strategy style game where you have an assistant living alongside you, and you're kind of commanding it to help you. And it's a very sarcastic character. So, they were very used to these kind of, let's say, sycophantic types of companions, but the types that actually can come along and it like gives you snarky comments if you command it in like a rude way. And so that'll be coming out. And then there'll be a few other experiences, I think, in the summer and then more in the fall and following that. The reality is games take a while to develop. And so I think that earlier on we also have some mods. We just released a Skyrim mod, a Bannerlord mod. Before that, we'll have a few more mods coming out. And those are super fun because people can go in and actually craft their own personalities for the characters within it. I'm not sure if folks there's like the Whiterun guard in Skyrim who was very famous because he had like the arrow in his knee and became kind of like quite a popular character, and we brought that to life. And so I think mods, DLCs, and that will be kind of the earliest things. A few of these smaller experiences, and then I think AAA games will take a couple of years to actually come out just because the development cycles are longer. But frankly, there's a few things there. If you go to the Inworld website, you can kind of find those and try them out. And then there'll be a few more coming out in the next few months, so super excited to share those.
Yeah, it's about mods. I think mods are the early adopters of the technology by far. Also, the ones that we're working will take 2 to 3 years to come out. Well, actually, one will be by the end of the year. But it's in the space of games that require a lot of simulations in virtual worlds or worlds that are not even created today, and they will allow the users to create their own species, for instance. But yeah, again, I think it will take some time because games take long. Mods are the way to start early testing our technologies.
And it's not because we don't see hundreds of games powered by AI today that studios are not using it. And I was at a 16Z meetup last week where they shared some results of a survey they made with 230 studios. And what I've seen on one slide is that 87% of the studio surveyed currently use AI in some ways. In the future, 99% of the studio said, yes, we're going to use it. And they already use ChatGPT 90%, Midjourney 70%, Stable Diffusion 50% and more. So it's coming, and it's coming pretty fast.
Yeah, I used to run a small game studio as well, but it was about 8 years ago. So the landscape, I think, now would be very different. Like, we talked a little bit about that, but do you think it can really, reduce development times for game studios? Like, if you're a smaller studio, could you get started by even being just like one person or two? How does that change? Because I remember when we were first doing that, we needed at least 3, 4, 5 people even to get started. But now I feel like, with the tools that are evolving, it's going to be much easier to start building quality games in a shorter amount of time. So do you really think, whatever is going on now is going to
I don't believe it. We see it. Yeah. 25% studios that told us, okay, with some tools like this, we are going to work 10x faster, at least just on the concepting phase. And probably also like some other improvement to be made later. And they're going to save $150K to $200K a year just on concepting for a 25-person studio, just to give an idea of the scale. So yeah, faster, cheaper. But time to market is more important than even, I would say, economies of scale and margins.
Yeah, and what we see is like a lot of creatives and writers. So, in the game development cycle, when you have writers and narrative designers working on this, we see a lot coming in actually just crafting characters, not necessarily because they want to use them in runtime right away, because they want to work on the personality of the character. So they actually create a character and then they interact with it as if they are actually a player, and that helps them sort of refine the personality of the characters. And then inside the game, the challenge right now is if you had to connect a whole game and have all the characters align in a certain narrative, it's really hard. You have to write the lines in a way that they're all consistent, and if one changes, it has to change, and you have a bunch of dialogue trees that change across a bunch of characters, whereas now you just update the knowledge that all those characters share, and they're all shared across that. And so it's not just kind of taking the existing development flow and making it faster, but it's actually changing the development flow in a way that kind of the process is itself a lot easier, and I think empowers the creative in a way to focus on the creative work versus like the hard technical work on the back end of that. And then also the technical folks can focus on more advanced things, like how do these characters react in certain ways? How are the gestures and emotions and actions engaged with the world? And so I think it's not just sort of a question of productivity improvement, but actually revamping development flows in a way that actually empowers each group across writers and narrative designers, game level designers and developers to actually focus on what they're doing well, and the AI to kind of complete let's say, the hard parts of that.
Yeah, and I think in addition, we are seeing a tendency of the no code. So suddenly you have game designers that might not be coders or might not be artists, that they have a variety of tools that they can put together to even conceptually create a first version of their game. And then, yeah, maybe they can grow it up into a studio, but we will start seeing more concepts coming out because of all these tools that allow the creation of games, even if you're not an artist or you're not a coder. Like, I would have loved to have all these things, years ago and be able to create my own games. Now we could. So that's also another advantage that I see coming up.
Yeah, I work a lot also in the education space, and all of that is super exciting as well. It's lowering the barrier to entry into building games, not just for entertainment, but for, other areas where, person who's building the game actually doesn't really know how to code. And so all of the things that, you're building, I guess we're getting closer to being able to use AI to generate a full game sometime. I don't know if we're there yet, but hopefully that's something that could be interesting. And I'm thinking we have 5 minutes left, 4 minutes, so maybe we could open up questions from the audience for a little bit. So does anyone have a question to ask our panelists? And if you do, I think there's a mic there that is for that, in the middle of the room. So you actually have to get up and then go there.
All right, so this is kind of an ethical, conceptual question, especially with your AI you were talking about that is designed to give specific interaction for an individual, customized interaction. So I read recently that people are already worried about ChatGPT in the 2024 election, that you can take ChatGPT, give it a lie you want to sell, and then take people's personal information and feed that in and get a very customized, you can get all, 300 million Americans in an afternoon with a targeted, customized scam, or in other, other type scams, banking scams, identity theft, all sorts of things. Have you given any consideration to what you're going to do with that? Because so far, ChatGPT, every security measure they have put in, you could just abstract it to the level and say, okay, pretend you're me. How would I tell you to get around this? And then they fix that, and pretend you're me, being you, being me. How do I get around your security measure? Have you given any thought to those considerations? Yeah, so there's a very simple way that we solve this. Like, usually out of the box is we actually don't let the characters talk about certain topics. So for example, politics is one of those. So you actually could, for example, like have a block on the ability to talk about politics, and then we allow those to be removed for certain customers. So let's say we created a game with a large game studio, and in that game there was politics in a virtual world. You could unlock that, but sort of constrain it to that specific world. And so there's like one kind of, let's say the nuclear option is to basically just block off all potential discussion of certain topics. And then I think there's also something of how you expose these things. So the way that we think about this, and one of the reasons that we think virtual worlds are such a good kind of starting ground for a lot of AI work is it's safer. So if you're within a game world and you're getting told, a specific political statement, it's very unlikely, you're going to trust that Thor in, a Marvel game is actually giving you accurate information on a US election. And so I think there's also a question of where we expose these things, versus trying to say that the challenge with, I think, some of the kind of horizontal models like ChatGPT is we kind of see them as oracles.
and we assume that they're going to be truthful. Whereas when you kind of introduce these things into contextualized virtual worlds, there's a certain understanding that the user has of what that world is, what truth is in that world, and kind of takes it in that way. Of course, there's like an evolving way that we actually monitor this, so we actually have triggers that kind of come in, and actually our team will review. So this happens if there's an unsafe statement that's made, as well as if there's things to do with, you know, hate speech, you know, discrimination against certain groups, and lots of those areas. And then we'll actually review those and remove those users if that's triggered. So it's an evolving challenge, of course, and I recognize, you know, users will try and always get around these, but I think through a variety of these and taking it very seriously and working with our partners as well to review those logs and check it as well, I think this is just one of those things that will continuously be like one of the top P0s on us as a company and for the industry.
Hello. I was just wondering what you think some of the biggest game companies are doing internally right now, either within, say, their studios or in sort of centralized, you know, corporate research in this area. Like, is there some intelligence you have about like how they're embracing it, or whether they have the talent or not to do this? Just anything, you know, that's suggesting how fast they're going to adopt this different kind of AI.
Yeah, without dropping names necessarily, they all are working on it to some extent. Some start at the model level. They train their own models. I mean, I think Blizzard announced a few weeks ago they would have Blizzard Diffusion, trained specifically on World of Warcraft and Warcraft data, maybe more. So that's one way to develop proprietary data that won't be shared with anybody else but them. Other large studios are developing tools. They have the teams. Riot has a team of 20 ML engineers. But 20 ML engineers in AI right now, it's nothing. So I still doubt whether these big studios will keep up with the avalanche of, you know, tools and frameworks that are being put out there. I truly believe there is a way for them to have their own proprietary models developed, whether it's like base models, foundation models, fine-tuned models, and so on. And they are still, all of them are still wondering how to navigate the legal framework, whether it's okay to use Stable Diffusion or not, whether it's okay to fine-tune or not, and so on. There are still some pending questions. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. So I think there's also like, so Ubisoft, for example, had like the Ghostwriter that came out. And the way that I've seen it is a lot of the studios are working at least immediately on, okay, we're developing an existing game, we have a specific development flow, how do we speed that up? So for example, Ghostwriter is an example of that, of how you can actually speed up the generation of dialogue trees. And we've actually, you know, partnered with a few groups and are looking at similar products that we'll be able to support them with for folks who don't want to do unscripted dialogue. And so I think there's sort of that question of taking existing flows and improving them. So, you know, the Stable Diffusion or generation of assets. I've seen some groups doing animation. So for example, like, you know, instead of having to take your entire animation and build it from scratch or do mocap, being able to just do retargeting from point to point and then generate the actual flow of the animation between those two. And so I think a lot of those are where the existing flow will work, is where you have it like, you know, these existing roles that exist in the company. Instead of hiring, you know, 20 more, you use AI to enhance those. But they're not necessarily revamping the entire workflow from scratch. And then there, I think, is this challenge where, you know, to basically train, especially large language models from scratch, train them in a way that, you know, is scalable. It's just not a talent that they necessarily have, and also may not make sense to have like even economically may not make sense for a specific company to own that end to end versus being able to take a model that is trained for a specific modality like dialogue, character, assets, and then being able to verticalize that for the specific client. And so that's, I think, what I've generally seen. There's also been there was a few other interesting things that I saw recently from a couple of game studios, which were around animation, and then also on the idea of like an ability to retexture. So I think on maps is a very common area that they're using it right now. So for example, being able to take like an existing map that they have, especially if they have proprietary engines, and being able to automatically texture it or type in text and then like generate a base map, and then they can use AI to kind of adapt parts of that. Those seem to be the parts of it they're largely focused on, less so on the like character and dialogue parts, at least from our conversations.
In our case, what I hear more is because of what we do is how can we speed up their productions. So I have this general sense that since ChatGPT came out, there's an urgency for doing more faster. So studios that before would have not maybe rely on contacting third parties that already have a development done, they will just do it themselves. I see a more openness into working with other companies that maybe have solved a specific problem that could help them speed up and be first to market. So that's the general sense that I get.
Question?
Thank you. Hi, Celine Tricart, game designer, VR. When you say one of the potential of AI is also to provide some customized content that aligns to the player's age or God forbid ethnicity or origin, etc. So, of course, it's pretty scary to think that we will be locked even further into our echo chambers. But more importantly, like I'm from Europe and we have very strong privacy laws. How would that go through, you know, the GDPR? Like, how can we get access to this kind of super private information about the player to provide customized, personalized content?
Yeah, so technically, actually, the way that it works and the way that you're very careful about it is most of that data only lives on the client side. So you're actually never ingesting it into the server. So what that means is usually, like, if you are going to have any adaptation, literally the way that the system has to be set up is that a lot of that personalized information literally lives on the client side, and it's up to, like, let's say it's a game engine like Unity or Unreal. If they were to even introduce that, it's up to them to deal with that. But for us, for example, we basically make sure that that data basically lives on the client side, and that if anything that passes into our model, by that point, there's basically zero PII involved. And so GDPR is a major consideration for us. And so that's how we deal with it, at least at Inworld, is ensuring that basically any PII is only handled on the client side, and even the variables that they control. So for example, any demographic information that they want, we don't decide what that is or what's required. They decide what that is. They decide how to handle it, how to kind of source and store that data. By the time it passes into us, they're basically just passing us the strings or the information that the user has provided, along as whatever their let's say reformatted versions of that information is. Let's say it's to whatever their rogue or whatever there is in the specific game world, and that way we're ensuring that. And so there's like literally a technical consideration of making sure that none of that information literally even passes any wires, which is a technical challenge, but I think is super important to maintain that integrity.
So that means you're not using that data to like feedback your data set, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, no PII is ever used in any training. Storing is never even stored or processed. Yeah.
In our case, we own all our data sets, so they don't belong to anyone. That's number one. Number two is all the data relies on the client as well, except for when we do the selfie and likeness, because we need to process on the cloud, but that is anonymized. And then the result that goes back, it belongs to the user. So we never own the IP of any asset that we create. And we're based in Europe, so we're extremely regulated by the EU. We have European projects, so it's very heavy on it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, okay. All right, keep it short.
All right. So I've heard you all talk a lot about deep learning and large language models, but neither of those have shown to be very good at problem solving. And you kind of mentioned earlier game engines, responsiveness, unique challenges to a player, but large language models and deep learning, I mean, they just don't do it very well compared to other AI models. So have you been strictly looking at LLMs and deep learning, or are you utilizing multiple AI techniques in your?
At least for us, we have, I think it's like 35 different models that are used now. Some of those are large language models. Some of those are more basic classifiers. Some of those are different multimodal models. Some of those are filters or transformers that are used, for example, for safety. It's everything. I mean, increasingly we're looking at how we can refine those down to a smaller amount of models. But at this point, to your point, all of those are done in parallel. And so if you were running, for example, 40 different large language models the size of GPT-3 or 4, the cost and latency is going to be pretty dramatic. And so we basically introduce a series of models, process a lot of different inputs that deal with different things like emotions, goals, relationships. Each of those are actually a different model. Each of those are different architectures, and then those will output and are actually processed by larger models. And so it's a complex mapping that is all set to make sure that it's all responsive in real time.
And I will just add that AI is not the solution for everything. So in our case, we do a combination of like AI algorithms, computer vision, computer graphic. So it's a combination of these three different, in our case, skill sets that make the final product, including the many, many models that we have of AI, right? So let's keep your mind open because it's not always just AI.
I just wanted to wrap you guys out, and let's have a big hand for these guys. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Just a few quick announcements before everyone disappears. So at around now, actually, is a happy hour at Mission City Ballroom. And the Augie Awards are tonight at 7 o'clock, also in the Mission City Ballroom. And then there's the official AWE after party at the Hilton Santa Clara. And then just to give one more big round of thank yous to our gold sponsors, Ant Reality, Arbor AR, HoloLight, Lenovo, Sightful, Zapper, and our titanium sponsors, Magic Leap, Niantic, Qualcomm, Snap AR, and Xreal. It's been great having you all here. Thanks for joining us here in Ballroom C for the AI and Virtual Beings track. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you, panelists.